Hi, welcome back to the workshop for episode 16 of the Rickenbacker 620 12-string build. And in this episode, we're going to be doing all the preparation work and actually getting the binding stuck onto the fingerboard. There's quite a lot of work involved in this, so it's a slightly longer episode than normal. So get yourself a brew, get yourself settled down, and we'll get this fingerboard sorted out. Okay, so in the last episode, we got all these inlays in, and I think they look absolutely lush. Really happy with the way that they've gone. And the next logical step in this process is to actually get the binding fitted to this fretboard. However, before I do that, I just want to make sure that these fret slots are absolutely perfect, because getting them down to the correct depth with the binding on is virtually impossible. Really don't want to do that. Handily, my fret wire has turned up, which means I've been able to exactly measure the tang, which is about 1.7 mil. And I can then set up my fret slotting saw to that kind of exact dimension. If anything, it needs to be a little bit deeper than that, but only marginally. You can always put a bit of glue in the bottom of these fret slots, which is what I intend to do to fill that void. If, however, they're not deep enough, you're just not going to get the frets in properly. So I'll get this set up in my vise on my little bit of scrap wood that I've been using for this, and we'll get them sorted out. Okay, so that's all the fret slots put back in now. This saw actually does a really good job. The guide follows the radius of the fretboard really well, and that just ensures that you get the appropriate depth of slot cut that follows the radius of board realistically as accurately as you need to with wood. Wood moves, so you know, we're not talking microns here. With that done, we're almost ready to start getting this prepared for the binding, but there is another job that I normally do just before I put my frets in, which obviously the addition of binding to this board will make impossible without damaging the binding, and that is to use a small triangular file just to kind of cut in a leading edge onto these fret slots. It's a very quick job, it doesn't take long, and you don't actually need to take that much off, but it just makes your fretting experience a whole heap nicer. Okay, so with that done, we can now start to kind of think about getting the binding on. But this is the point where one of the differences between my build and a real Rickenbacker and also the plans comes into play, because unlike the real Rickenbacker where there's multiple truss rods adjusted from the headstock end, my build has one dual action truss rod that actually adjusts from the body end of the neck, which means that I need to cut some access into this fretboard. However, it might not be just as simple as finding out where I need to end this fretboard and lopping that bit off and cutting some access in, because I know from experience you need to keep these adjusters a little bit away from the fret slot, otherwise the wood that's left at the end of the fretboard in the adjuster slot is very prone to chipping, and I don't want that. So we need to have a think about this and be very careful as to how we go about cutting this in. And at the moment that's going to be fairly difficult because I don't actually have the access to get this adjuster in. So the first thing we need to do is kind of cut a slot in the end of this neck section to accommodate the adjuster. An added complication is, on the real build, the pickup sits flush against the end of the neck. So that means that this adjuster has to sit flush against the end of the neck, which means it's going to be very close to that last fret. So that's something we're going to have to pay very careful attention to once the time comes. Potentially, I could just move the pickup slightly that way to allow for a little bit more room, but aesthetically I don't think that that's my best move. The position of the fretboard, of course, isn't set in stone at this stage. It could move one way or the other ever so slightly, and all that would mean is that we'd have to adjust the bridge accordingly once that time came. So to move forward, I think the next stage is to get this body out of the way and just figure out a way of cutting the appropriate amount of clearance in here to make this fit. It will have to go down ever so slightly below this plane here, but it isn't that much, so I can't really see it being a problem. Okay, so there's the adjuster put in. Was a little bit of work, but it wasn't too bad. Went in okay in the end. Probably needed a little bit of cleaning up work on it, but it is where we need it to be for the time being. And I think actually, once we get the body on, it won't look too bad at all. So with that done, the next thing is to get this fretboard off its block and see if we can start to work out exactly how this is going to go. And all I'm going to do is just put this onto the nut line, and then I'm going to mark where this last fret sits, which is kind of there. And as you can see, that doesn't really leave us an awful lot of room. And I actually think if we were to put it there, we would be cutting so close to this fret slot that it would just basically be the binding. I think there's a very strong argument for just moving this up a little bit so the back of that slot would sit just about there, which leaves us a much nicer margin around that fret slot. It's not so much cutting this and putting the binding on and everything that's the problem, it's when you knock that fret in. If there's not enough material there to support the fret going in, it will just push it that way. Binding might help in that situation, but I'm really just not willing to risk it. From here, I think the next logical thing we can do is get the fretboard set up in the exact position that we want it by pinning it with a couple of cocktail sticks through 2 appropriate fret slots. And that will give us a kind of repeatable indexed position for the fretboard, and then we can start to take some really serious measurements of where we need to be, A, trimming this fingerboard down, and then B, cutting out this little notch for the adjuster. Okay, so now we've got these 2 location holes established. We can get this on and off exactly where we need it to be without having to worry about measurements and stuff. So next up is we need to get the truss rod back in and establish exactly where it is that we need to be marking the neck. And then from there we can put the fretboard back on, mark that up really accurately, trim off the excess, and then start to think about getting this little notch put in place. Okay, so we're slowly working our way through this. I've trimmed this down now, and there's a little bit of extra material there to allow for the binding. So now what we need to do is to just remove the material back to this line, and hopefully that will leave us plenty of room when we include the binding to make that work. So this I've measured is 19mm, but I don't think we need the full thickness because the full thickness is further down. So I'm going to go at 16mm, but then I need to add on 3mm for my cutout to allow for the thickness of the binding as we come round. So I'm going to make a little cutout in there. That'll be 19mm. I'm going to cut the bulk out on the bandsaw, but then I'm going to clean it out with the router so that we get nice curved corners into there, just to make it a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. And to route this in, I've just made up a very temporary little jig out of some MDF, which I will run my router cutter around. I'll just run the shank of the cutter around this little cutout here, and that should hopefully give me a nice, neat, clean cut on the front of the fretboard. Okay, so there's that little cutout put into the fretboard. That was a very nerve-wracking moment, but it's actually come out really nicely. It's kind of exactly what I wanted it to be. So next we can move on to what I thought I was going to be doing for the bulk of this episode and ended up not doing, and that's getting this binding actually onto the fretboard. And I'm going to start by getting this little bit done first, because that is going to be by far the trickiest bit. And as you can probably see there, this isn't really going to want to go in there too readily. So I'm just going to start off by cutting a piece off this binding, and we're going to have to preform this to that cutout. And we will do that by just adding a little bit of heat to it, get it into a bit of a softer state, and then bend those radii onto it and find some way of keeping it in place until it cools off a bit and hopefully holds that shape a bit better. Okay, and to hopefully help me do this, I've got, this is basically, it's an old router cutter in this vise. It's used up and isn't much use for anything else, but obviously this radius is the same as the radius that I cut in there, so hopefully this will help me. So literally I'm just going to heat this up with the heat gun a little bit. Perhaps a little bit too much, and we'll just hold it on there until it cools off a bit. So that's one. I'll just repeat that. Okay, so that's that little bit kind of shaped up pretty close. It's not absolutely 100% there yet, but I think once I get one side glued in, I can get a bit of pressure onto this other side and just force that into that corner a tiny little bit better. Okay, so time to get the binding on. Hopefully this is going to be relatively quick and straightforward. I've got my binding here. It's just bog standard 6mm by 1.5mm cream ABS. And I'm going to stick it on with some acetone. And I prefer this method because A, it's very quick. B, it's much easier to clean up than using super glue, and C, you don't get your hands all glued up. The only problem I've got is, and I've just done a quick test to see whether acetone melts this perloid, and it does. It melts it real good. So I'm going to have to be careful not to get too much onto this perloid, and if I do get some on, not to kind of touch it too much, just let it evaporate and it shouldn't cause too much damage. So to make sure that we have as few problems as possible, I'm just actually going to tape this fretboard up on all the areas that have inlays, just leaving that tiny little bit of edge exposed. Now there's every chance that the acetone might wick underneath this masking tape because it is water thin. But if that happens, you know, it's just something we're going to have to deal with. So next, I'm just going to cut two kind of rough lengths of the binding down to size. And I'm just going to take them in position just along this fingerboard. I'll just do that on both sides. And that will serve to hold everything in the right place while we get it stuck down. And to get the acetone where we need it, I'm simply going to use a syringe with a needle on. This isn't one of your hypodemic needles. This one is just, it's blunt basically. I think they refer to it as a drawing up needle. So it's what you'd get a drug into the syringe with before you swapped it out for the needle you're actually going to jab into someone. We're not doing any of those things today. All I'm going to do is just get a little bit of acetone into the syringe, and it's simply a case of just working your way down and just introducing a little bit of acetone down the side of that binding and getting some tape onto it. And in theory what happens is that acetone wicks into that joint, melts the ABS a little bit, and then you just tape it down to your fretboard. So I'll carry on and I'll get the other side done and join you back once it's completed. Okay, so that's the first round done. I'm going to leave this for a few minutes now just for everything to set up. Acetone does evaporate very quickly, but obviously a fair bit of it is going to be trapped underneath this masking tape, so it might take a little while for it to fully harden up again. And then we'll get the masking tape off and just see if any of the little bits where we had initially taped that binding on just need a little bit more acetone to get it fully adhered. Okay, so that's the two big bits on. I've been up and down this testing it, and it all appears to be stuck very, very well. So the next step in this is to just kind of trim it down a little bit. These ends are quite easy. Just a case of snipping off the excess. But these ends, I actually want to put a bit of a mitre on when I put these last two bits on. So I'll just get a bit of scrap on there and put my big eyes on so I can see what I'm doing. And then I'm just going to take a nice sharp chisel and just cut that in. Like that. So it's just a case now of cutting a couple of little sections of this, mitering the ends to suit. So just drop that in position, add the acetone, put the tape on. Just do the same with the second one. Okay, so that's those two little bits stuck on, looking really nice just out of the bag. There's a little bit of cleaning up work that we can do on them. With that done, I'll now get this mounted back onto its little block of wood, back in the vise, and we will get all these bindings scraped down and get the rest of the fingerboard cleaned back up. And this bit is fairly straightforward. It's just a nice sharp utility knife blade, and just scrape along, just trying to keep it at a little bit of an angle, kind of approximating the radius on the board. Okay, and there we have the nearly finished fretboard. I just need to do a little bit of tidying up work on it just to get it back up to the gloss that it did have before. But all in all, I'm really happy with the way that that's come out, and I think the binding really does add to the look of this. So with that done, I think this is a good place to leave this episode. It's probably going to be a little bit longer than most because this has taken quite a long time to do, but as I say, definitely been worth the effort. So I'm going to be back in a few days' time with the next episode. I'll probably put the fretboard to one side because I'm getting a little bit sick of it, if I'm honest, and we'll start working on the body again. But that's going to be in a couple of days' time. So until then, like if you've liked, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.